utilize the chat function in this during the program. If you have any questions that you would like to share with us or ask, just type them into the chat, and periodically we're going to stop to answer questions that may come through. And then at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn Gerasi for some information about the continuing judicial education.
Thank you, Amanda, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able just to take a brief few minutes at the beginning of your training. And I thank you very much for the for inviting town and village justices to participate or to take advantage of the training that you're putting on. So thank you very much. It appears that we have, for my count, about 6 of us total town and village judges from Chautauqua County here to view this training. So thank you. So for the judges that are currently present, I had sent to you 2 forms. I had sent to you attached to my email, which are the credit affirmation form and the sign-in form. So each of you will need to print those documents and fill those out and then scan those back to me. Make sure you're signing both in the appropriate areas. For the credit sign-in form, you'll need to sign in the time, which is the 2 o'clock, and then you'll have to designate the time that the training ended, and then scan both of those documents back to me, and then I will send those off to the Office of Justice Court Support so you could all get credit. So if you have any questions regarding that, please feel free to either call me or email me. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Gabrielle.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for helping us, get more people on this webinar. It's great. So I want to start just by saying that Center for Elder Law and Justice, we believe that all people, regardless of their age or ability, deserve to live free of abuse or neglect and to be able to participate fully in society. As more and more Americans live longer and healthier lives, we need to strengthen and support our social systems to ensure access for older people. Center for Elder Law and Justice is the lead partner on the Elder Advocacy Program. It's a cross-systems collaborative approach between Center for Elder Law and Justice, Chautauqua County, and the New York State Unified Court System, which is working to remove accessibility barriers, improve outcomes, and ensure equity for older adults. So our program is funded by grants, and our funders require this standard disclosure. It's important to note that the point of view or opinions expressed in this training do not necessarily represent the views of our funders or the Department of Health and Human Services policy. So I just want to share a little bit about what to expect during the training. So we're going to discuss what the Elder Advocacy Program is. We're going to share a video from the Department of Justice. We'll discuss changing demographics, what elder abuse, as well as the types of elder abuse, including financial exploitation, look like, what the dynamics of elder abuse are, as well as risk factors for survivors and perpetrators, the factors that affect a survivor's willingness to report elder abuse. We're going to discuss the aging process and cognitive changes facing older adults, as well as capacity, concepts to keep in mind when interviewing survivors, types of elder abuse cases, and New York State law regarding elder abuse. And then we'll end with any further questions that anybody has. And as I said, if you have any questions at all while we're going along, go ahead and type them right into the chat, and we will periodically stop and answer questions. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions at this point, or are we all set to get started? I'm taking that as a yes. Go ahead and get started. Okay. So what is the Elder Advocacy Program? The Elder Advocacy Program is a pilot project in Chautauqua County, New York, funded by an Elder Justice Innovation Grant that was awarded by the Administration for Community Living. It's a partnership with Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, the New York State Unified Court System. It's only one of 5 grants that's awarded, or we received one of only 5 grants awarded nationally, and the only one that went to a non-university. What does the Elder Advocacy Program do? It acts as a single point of entry for survivors of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Our aim is identifying and addressing a survivor's full range of needs, reducing harm and empowering our survivors so that they're able to become as whole again as possible, while addressing systemic barriers to our justice and social systems and improving court and long-term outcomes for survivors. So how do we do that? It's a single point of entry system, essentially like a one-stop shop referral, a destination for elder abuse survivors, as well as community members and our allied professionals that suspect elder abuse of an older adult. Next slide. Okay. And what is our referral criteria? So any older adult that appears to be experiencing or suspected of experiencing any form of elder abuse or financial exploitation is eligible for referral to the Elder Advocacy Program. The Elder Advocacy Program aims to assist all individuals in our community age 55 and over that, as I said, that are suspected of or are experiencing elder abuse and financial exploitation. So who reaches out to us for help? We receive calls and referrals from survivors themselves. We receive calls from family members. Adult Protective Service Agency is a huge partner of ours. Our local law enforcement, the Sheriff's Office, New York State Police, the District Attorney's Office, the court systems themselves, as well as Office of the Aging, the Salvation Army and News Center shelter system refers to us. We try to keep that open relationship with all of our community partners facilities in Chautauqua County. Our intake process at the Elder Advocacy Program is a social worker and attorney conducting a global assessment of the survivor of elder abuse's needs, both legal and non-legal. It includes civil legal representation on current civil matters or future elder abuse related cases. It's reviewed by the Chautauqua County Enhanced Multidisciplinaries team, which I facilitate. Our Enhanced Multidisciplinaries team in Chautauqua County is comprised of Center for Elder Law and Justice, as well as the Sheriff's Department, the District Attorney's Office, New York State Police, local police agencies, Office of Aging, Adult Protective Services. We have quite a bit of representation in our county. We assist engaging with law enforcement and law enforcement referrals. We assist with courtroom accessibility. We assist with finances, medical, social, and other community services.
Sorry, you guys, I lost control of PowerPoint for a second. So one of the things that our office is able to do is connect survivors with direct services through legal services, civil legal representation. This includes family court orders of protection, power of attorney drafting or revocation, meaning we revoke power of attorneys that maybe aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and execute new power of attorneys for someone that is responsible, execution of healthcare proxies, special proceedings in order to compel accounting from power of attorneys, civil complaints to recover funds. If someone's been financially exploited, we can go to civil court in order to attempt to recover money, and evictions or ejectments in cases where the abuser may be living in the home and they need to be removed.
Some additional direct services, and there are several slides, so just bear with me. Case review by the Chautauqua County and Elder Abuse Enhanced Multidisciplinary Team. So what the Enhanced Multidisciplinary Team is, it's a national evidence-based model for reviewing complex cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation with the goal of increasing prosecution and restitution. We work directly with Lifespan of Greater Rochester. Our Chautauqua County Enhanced Multidisciplinaries team work together to heighten and increase awareness of cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation in our community. It's built off the premise of like with the Child Advocacy Multidisciplinaries team, with the intention to coordinate investigation by the team members, to intervene, stop abuse, prevent further abuse and harm, initiate criminal prosecution, gain awards of restitution. In our county, our partners on the Enhanced Multidisciplinary team, like I said, we've got the investigators at the Sheriff's Department, some of the Sheriff's Department, the Assistant District or the District Attorney's Office. We've got local law enforcement, Adult Protective Services, Office of Aging, and I don't mean just one person from each agency, I mean several from each agency. So we're always, we work together. We truly are a really good team. Next slide. Next, on our direct services, assistance with law enforcement. So the Elder Advocacy Program staff works to support and assist clients from the initial contact and reporting with law enforcement. We work with the survivor on follow-up with law enforcement once they have reported. We advocate for the wishes of the survivor, and we assist in contacting them with victim assistance programs. In addition, the Elder Advocacy Program staff assists law enforcement in obtaining bank records, communicating with survivors, and even at times with perpetrators in elder abuse cases. Next is assistant with courtroom accessibility. Our grant provides additional funds to assist older adults with the cost of transportation to and from court, as well as accessibility devices like wheelchairs, hearing amplifiers, and document magnifiers that they may need. The program provides a court support person, which is myself, to attend hearings and wait with clients in the waiting room just to be a support and keep them calm. We advocate for appropriate court calendaring and case handling. So if we know that a client has, let's say, sundowner syndrome, for example, we would advocate for an earlier appointment for that client, because we would know that waiting for a time later in the day may not necessarily work out best for the client. And then last on this list is a remote electronic filing and video conferencing for petitions for temporary orders of protection in family court. We're able to go, well, prior to COVID and a little bit now, we're able to go right into a client's home, go over the case with them, contact the court, file the appropriate paperwork and documents, have the video conference with the judge. And when we leave their home, we're able to print, we have a mobile printer, so we're able to print out the documents and hand them their copies before we even leave the home. So from start to finish, we're there through the process, help them through the process, and leave them feeling in a better space and a lot more secure. Assistance with finances. So we work to connect our clients with Adult Protective Services for rep payee assistance, as well as counsel and advice on advocating for appropriate guardianship by a trusted individual, again, through Adult Protective Services. We advocate directly to banks on the behalf of our clients. We make warm referrals to Office of Aging for additional services. In addition, we have other emergency funds available under our grants for certain essential needs of a client that may not be being met, like food, medication, housing, moving expenses, things of that nature. Next slide is assistance with medical needs. So the Elder Advocacy Program assists with medical needs by making the warm referral, again, to OFA through the New York Connect system for in-home services, both medical and companion services. We can make a direct referral to a geriatric psychiatrist for capacity evaluations. We advocate to the Department of Social Services for Medicaid applications and Medicaid application denials. And we make referrals to the Western New York Coalition Pool Trust, which is a supplemental needs trust that's managed by the Center for Elder Law and Justice, People Inc., and Key Bank. Assistance with social needs and activities of daily living. So this is the last slide under our direct services. Our team assists with social needs and activities of daily living. We make referrals to OFA and New York Connects for things like adult day services, Meals on Wheels. We work really hard to try to establish whether or not a survivor is in need of community centers or home companion services any things that would decrease isolation, like maybe phone calls from a friendship line or just someone to talk to. And we also assist them lining up services for household chores, which would be companion services, and as well as if they need assistance with those activities of daily living. Increasing awareness of elder abuse and the elder advocacy program we work diligently to train on elder abuse and financial exploitation. We train community members and people that are in their own homes and independent living facilities. We train our allied professionals. We're training in the community to stakeholders. We make our program accessible by outreach to community members and partners. And we have had all of our materials translated into Spanish so that we are able to hit even that much of a broader audience. So the Elder Advocacy Program, most of these on this slide have at one point in time or another been conducted, or they're scheduled, or they were scheduled prior to COVID, and we're now rescheduling finally. So of course, the courts are on here, and thank you all again for joining us today. Local police department, New York State Police, the Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Office. We've trained multiple times with Adult Protective Services, Office of Aging and Meals on Wheels. Some of these trainings we do in one big training like we're doing with everyone on here today, and if there need to be more individualized, we can do individual trainings as well. We've trained financial institutions and adult day service programs as well. Next slide. So the creation of the Elder Advocacy Program Desk Guide. So this is a tool that can be utilized for identifying elder abuse, locating substantive law, practical considerations for courts, and community resources. Each of you should have received a copy of the Program Desk Guide. It was a little over a year ago now. If someone doesn't have that, add your information to the chat because we want to be sure to get a copy to you.
So if you all bear with me, we have a video. I'm hoping I can just click this button and it'll work, but bear with me.
Next, we're going to talk about the changing demographics. Next slide, Gabe. So in 2015, there were approximately 47.8 million Americans who were 65 or over. By 2050, the population of people in America age 65 or over is supposed to almost double to 83.7 million. In 2050, 1 out of 5 people worldwide will be over the age of 60. In New York State and Chautauqua County in 2017, 19.6% of Chautauqua County's residents were over the age of 65, compared to a 15.4% statewide average. And approximately 24,390 individuals in our county are 65 and over. Next. Elder abuse in New York State. So the growth of the aging population, coupled with the growing occurrences of elder abuse, creates a need to evaluate and improve on the core systems that were currently in place to help older adults in our community in their recovery from maltreatment. Nationally, at least 10% of older adults experience abuse. In New York State, that's approximately 260,000 that have experienced abuse in the last year alone. Next slide. What is elder abuse? Elder abuse typically does not refer to an isolated event, but a sequence of actions or a failure to act that cause harm to an older adult. Elder abuse often leads to a decline in functional abilities, which can contribute to dependency, social isolation, a sense of helplessness for the survivor, as well as a cycle of increasing stress and psychological decline. Next slide. I'm going to touch on the types of elder abuse and then go into more detail in the next several slides. So the types of elder abuse are physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. While there is no magic number for elder abuse, it's typical that those aged 60 and over have the highest rate of suffering. Again, the Elder Advocacy Program can assist those individuals aged 55 and over. Women are more likely than men to be victims. That's not to say that men can't be victims too, because they are. And elder abuse hits all racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and religious backgrounds. It can touch anyone, anywhere. Next slide. Who's committing elder abuse? Unfortunately, elder abuse is perpetrated by trusted individuals and family members, most commonly. They're the most common offenders that we see of both elder abuse and financial exploitation. And this would include children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, friends, and intimate partners of that older adult. And it occurs in all relationships. So it's not limited to any relationship, heterosexual relationships, gay and lesbian relationships, dating relationships, caregiver relationships, people in a position of authority, as well as, we'll get into this later too, as well as criminal organizations, which in the Elder Advocacy Program, we call these organizations scammers. Where does elder abuse occur? So private residence within the community, 95.5% of the time, and in facilities, in nursing homes and things like that, 4.5%. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about ageism and elder abuse. Abusers rely on the stereotypes of ageism for older adults. Many times they use it to explain away the abuse and the symptoms that a survivor is suffering with. So this is a way that abuse can be excused or ignored because of our biases about aging. Our program strives to help create a society that includes treating older adults as equal members of society again, making sure that we're all interconnecting within our communities so that our community's aging population can feel safe and secure, as well as to address elder abuse in general. Elder abuse under the radar is an understatement. So it's 1 in 23 cases of elder abuse is ever reported. And with financial exploitation, the numbers are even worse. It's 1 in 44 that's ever reported. Next slide. Oftentimes, the tactics used in elder abuse cases are similar to the power and control dynamics that are used against younger victims in situations of domestic violence. Abusers use caregiver stress as an excuse to justify their behaviors so that they will not be held accountable and to create sympathy for themselves. Everyone experiences stress. Most people do not abuse, neglect, and exploit their parents or their partner. The target is the older adult. It's not everyone. So people could see you as the nicest guy on the block, and yet you're going home and abusing your mom. Generally, there's a pattern. It's not an isolated incident. And we wouldn't tolerate similar circumstances when it comes to children or pets. So why would we tolerate it when it comes to the vulnerable population of older adults? Next. Approximately 90% of people who commit elder abuse are family members or trusted others. It's important to understand the dynamics of elder abuse. In cases involving perpetrators who are close to the older adult, there are often long-term established dysfunctional and violent dynamics that have existed throughout the relationship that can increase in severity as the older adult becomes more vulnerable and more dependent. In addition to maladaptive behavior in interpersonal relationships, caregiver stress and financial burdens that are frequently associated with caregiving oftentimes contribute to elder abuse. Next slide. Some of the characteristics of a vulnerable older adult. A person that suffers with decreased physical health and mobility. Maybe they have increased confusion, or they're becoming increasingly more forgetful and declining in capacity. If the person is isolated from family and friends and neighbors, the person may simply not know how to reach out or where to reach out to. They may always have been a social butterfly or one of those people that's just very trusting. It puts them in a more vulnerable position. And sometimes it's just a matter of lacking knowledge or understanding about new technology. Not everybody knows how to do these meetings. It's a generation of people that may not even know how to use a cell phone. And then the biggie is the fear of losing independence and dignity. That person that's perpetrating the crimes on this older adult may be the only thing standing between that older adult and the nursing home, the dreaded nursing home that nobody wants to go to. So the first form of abuse that we're going to talk about is physical abuse. And physical abuse is defined as the non-accidental use of force that results in bodily injury, pain, or impairment. Injury sustained by an older adult individual can have much more serious consequences than similar injuries imposed on a younger person. Their healing is not as fast, their skin is not as strong. Physical abuse of an older adult may result in nursing home placement, permanent disability, and death. Next slide. Some signs that physical abuse is occurring: unexplained, suspicious injuries, burns, bruises. One of the things that we learned in some of our trainings was that a break of like the bone here, the ulna, where it looks like the person is reaching up their arm to protect themselves. That's not a typical break from a fall. Dehydration and malnutrition, frequent changes of doctors and frequent hospital visits, as well as frequent not showing up for appointments. Next is emotional abuse. The definition of emotional abuse is the willful infliction of mental or emotional anguish. It can be by threat, humiliation, intimidation, or isolation. Emotional abuse includes frightening a person, intimidating them, speaking to them, or treating them in a way that causes them emotional pain or emotional distress. Isolation and scaring them on purpose or frightening them on purpose. Next slide. Some of the behavioral signs that emotional abuse is occurring: if the older adult becomes hesitant to openly talk anymore, they're overly anxious or overly agitated, or they're isolating or withdrawing themselves from situations where they used to join and they no longer do. They become non-responsive, they're becoming more and more confused or disoriented, and there's a drastic change in their normal daily activities. Next, sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is defined as contact with a person without their consent, which can include forced sexual touching, forced sexual contact, forcing sex with a third party, or inappropriate touching during routine care. It's important to note that the idea of sexual abuse in relationship to older adults can be difficult to compute. What happens then is it increases the likelihood that it's something that we might ignore or fail to recognize. Next slide. And some of the physical or behavioral signs that sexual abuse is occurring, maybe the older adult is all of a sudden having difficulty walking or sitting, unexplained sexually transmitted diseases. If they become hypervigilant or they have strange bruising patterns on certain parts of their body that would suggest that sexual assault has occurred, or they become shying away from just being touched, or they appear embarrassed or shameful. Next slide. So next I want to talk about neglect. There are 3 types of neglect. First, we're going to talk about active neglect, which is defined as willful failure by a caregiver to fulfill caretaking functions and responsibilities. So the biggie with active neglect is that it's intentional. It includes abandoning the person, willful deprivation of food and water, heat, clothing, clean clothing, bedding, like the doctor said in that video, dentures, eyeglasses, hearing aids. It's intentionally restricting the person from those things. In addition to the caregiver just plain old not taking care of their caregiving functions. Next is passive neglect. Passive neglect is defined as the non-willful failure to fulfill the caretaking responsibilities because of inadequate knowledge or training. So passive neglect, though it isn't intentional, is not any less damaging. It is abandonment or denial of food or health-related services because the caregiver just isn't equipped, doesn't have the proper knowledge. Or it can be where they just simply dispute the value of a prescribed service or medication. And last is self-neglect. Self-neglect is one of the things that we see most commonly here at Center for Elder Law and Justice. And self-neglect is a person's inability to perform their own tasks, essentially caring for their own self. It includes their inability to provide themselves with essential food, clothing or shelter, and medical care, obtaining goods and services that are necessary for them to maintain good physical health, mental health, and emotional well-being, and just their general safety, in addition to managing their own financial affairs. Next slide. So, environmental and physical signs that neglect is occurring. Sometimes the warning signs to neglect don't even have to be as extreme as lack of electricity or extreme filth. Can be things like sudden inability to meet essential physical, psychological, or social needs, which are threatening the older adult's health, safety, and just their overall general well-being. Maybe the older adult has disappeared from contact with neighbors, friends, or family. Just all of a sudden, they're just disappeared. They may appear hungry or malnourished, or suddenly showing signs of weight loss. They show up and they appear disoriented or confused, disheveled, or wearing dirty clothes. A failure by the caregivers to arrive to scheduled appointments, or they just stop showing up to appointments altogether. That the older adult may express feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, or insignificance. They're failing to take their prescribed medication or nutritional supplements that were keeping them healthy right along. They blame themselves for problems arising within the family or with the caregiver. And one of the biggies that we see is they're living in squalor and hazardous conditions such as hoarding or a seriously cluttered situation. Next slide.
All right, so an additional form of elder abuse is financial exploitation. Financial exploitation is defined as the unauthorized use of an individual's funds, property, or resources by another person. Financial exploitation is the most common form of elder abuse, and it often goes unrecognized. That's usually because you have to pull bank records or really dive into that person's finances to see it. However, when other forms of abuse are occurring, it is likely that financial abuse is also occurring. One in 20 seniors indicate that over the past year, they have experienced some form of financial exploitation. Nationally, financial exploitation accounts for 30.2% of all founded APS reports. So it definitely happens. We may not see it every day. It might not become prevalent, but it's happening, and it's just going unreported. Financial exploitation includes, but it's not limited to, straight fraud, forgery. Sometimes you see perpetrators forging their name on checks, forging the older adult's name, coerced property transfer. Sometimes you'll see an older adult will have deeded the home to someone, but they really didn't want to do that. They were coerced into it. Denial of access to funds. You see this a lot when a trusted individual is managing the finances of the older adult. The perpetrator won't let them access their own bank account or their own funds. And then you have theft, which is a lot of times just taking of the money, taking the debit card, using it in an unauthorized way, things of that nature. So the type of financial exploitation, we have financial exploitation by criminal organization, or scams. So these scams are perpetrated by groups of people who often target older adults for a variety of cons: bogus lotteries, sweetheart scams, grandparent scams. And older adults are often targeted because of the greater likelihood of isolation. They're home alone, they answer the phone, no one's there monitoring their habits, and because of the likelihood or increased likelihood of diminished capacity. They might not really understand what's being asked of them in that moment, so they're more likely to fall victim to scams. Scams can result in devastating losses to the older adult, and they're nearly impossible to recoup those losses. The other type of financial exploitation we see the most is financial exploitation by trusted individuals. The impact of financial abuse is that it costs older adults billions of dollars annually. It can be financially devastating to older adults because, unlike younger individuals who may be able to continue working throughout their lifetime, older adults are, generally speaking, not able to become employed at that point, retired, and they have to become reliant on government safety net programs. As a direct result of exploitation, 10% of financial abuse victims will require Medicaid. And an impact of that is a lot of times when there's uncompensated transfers, so you can't tell where the money went, they may have a hard time getting Medicaid. Survivors of financial exploitation suffer more than just monetary losses. They can lose their loss in trust in others. Sometimes even programs like ours or like other community programs that are designed to help survivors of financial abuse, that older adult will be unwilling to reach out or really trust other people because they had put their trust in someone, an individual in their family perhaps, or maybe they did think they trusted the scammer, so now they're leery, for lack of a better term. Loss of security. Perhaps they had a retirement plan, a pension, a good stable income to last them throughout the rest of their retirement, and now they've suffered significant losses and that money is no longer there, leaving them feeling unstable. A big thing we see in our practice is feelings of shame or guilt, embarrassment. I shouldn't have fallen for this. I shouldn't have trusted that person. Or how did I let this happen? And because of that shame and guilt, they're less likely to come forward, and they're less likely to tell you the whole story right away. You have to be patient for sure to get the whole story. So here we're going to talk about some of the bigger scams we see. We've got your sweepstakes, where somebody may claim that the older adult has won a sweepstakes, such as Publishers Clearinghouse, right? That's the one we tend to see. But in order to claim your prize, you have to pay out a fee, taxes, it can be anything. Transfer us this money in order to claim the larger amount of money. And I mean, whose dream isn't it to win Publishers Clearinghouse? So a lot of times older adults, they're living on a fixed income, they'll be like, oh, wow, I finally won this. And they'll succumb to that scam. We've got your grandparents scam. This is especially insidious because the scammer will call and say, your grandchild is in trouble, legal, maybe health-wise something, and you need to forward us this money so we can take care of that, or bail them out or something. And that person will do it because they're afraid for their grandchild. One of the larger ones we see in our office is the sweetheart scam. This is also heartbreaking because the scammer will put themselves in a position where they'll begin a relationship via chat or email with that older adult, and they'll con them into thinking that they are in a relationship and the scammer is going to come visit them or come move in with them, or they promise them the moon, but in order to deliver the moon, the older adult needs to send them funds. So those are some of the more common ones. We're always seeing new kinds. We're always seeing scammers get more and more creative, more and more aggressive, more and more threatening. So we really try to keep tabs on what is going on out in our community so that we know whether it's a scam and we can educate the community properly. So then, of course, you have financial abuse by trusted individuals. Again, Amanda mentioned this, that video mentioned it. These are people that are in close relationship to that older adult. You have power of attorney. If somebody becomes a power of attorney to the older adult and they begin utilizing that power of attorney in a way they were not supposed to. Social Security representative payee abuse. This can happen if an individual is named to be Social Security rep payee. The intended purpose is that the Social Security is put into an account and it's used to manage the bills of the older adult, day-to-day life, and suddenly you'll see that those bills aren't being paid and the older adult isn't able to afford things they were able to afford before. We see creation of joint accounts. Oftentimes it's conning or coercing that older adult into creating a joint account. Sometimes under the guise of, I can help you manage your online banking, or I can help you deposit and withdraw money. And then once that person's on that account, it's really hard to get them off. So we see that all the time. But just because someone's joined on the account, I want to make this point, just because somebody's joined on the account doesn't mean that they have, they're allowed to have access to that money. What we see a lot is that joint account will have all of just the older adult's contributions and none of that perpetrator's contributions. They're not entitled to that money just because they're joint. And then we have larceny, taking debit cards, taking the credit card number, stealing cash, things of that nature. So some of the warning signs of financial exploitation are if the caregiver or trusted individual suddenly has control of all the finances, and the older adult really doesn't know what's going on. You'll often hear older adults say, well, I don't know what's going on, they handle it. The older adult is accompanied by a coercive individual, somebody that won't let them speak, won't answer, they will answer questions for the older adult. You get significant withdrawals from bank accounts, large cash withdrawals, large purchases that weren't normal before. Suspicious changes in things such as wills, power of attorney, policies, deeds, unpaid bills. That is a huge red flag. If there are typical everyday utilities and bills that should be paid and they suddenly start to go unpaid, especially for medical care, that's a big red flag that someone is being exploited. And then going towards scams, we have recent new best friends or sweethearts, and the older adults sending them money for things that the sweetheart is claiming they need. So what does financial exploitation look like in the home of the older adult? A lot of times what you'll see is many people residing in the older adult's home. The older adult is the property owner, and you'll see grandkids and grandkids' significant others, or a friend, and then maybe several other friends of that friend just residing in the older adult's home suddenly. A lot of times we see this starts off as the older adult saying, yeah, you can stay with me for a little while you get on your feet, and then they don't leave and they end up exploiting the older adult. If the older adult's relegated to this one area of the home, such as their bedroom, that's where they stay all the time, that could be a warning sign. The older adult is unkempt, poor hygiene, some of the things that Amanda mentioned in neglect, those would be warning signs that also not only neglect, but financial exploitation is taking place as well. So I mentioned power of attorney abuse. What is a power of attorney? A power of attorney is a legal document in which an individual, the principal, so that would be the older adult in many of the cases we deal with, gives authority to a third party, the agent, to perform certain tasks and transactions and conduct business on the principal's behalf. It's a substituted decision-making document. Principals, so the older adult, can designate more than one agent or successor agents. A durable power of attorney, which is what you'll see most often, I think that's pretty much all you see at this point, give or take. This is valid even if the principal loses legal capacity. The durable power of attorney is a great tool for people who are doing some advanced planning and want to plan for that possibility of incapacity down the line. But it also presents the issue where if they do lose capacity down the line, that POA has quite a bit of power and responsibility on behalf of that principal. Something to note is that an agent has a fiduciary duty to the principal. This means that the agent is required by law to act in a trustworthy manner. They're required to act at the principal's direction or in their best interest. They're required to keep records of transactions, disbursements, receipts. They have to keep their property separate from the principal's property. And this is all codified in statute in New York State, so they are required to do these things. A power of attorney is a document for financial decisions and transactions. It's not for medical decisions. Would like someone to make medical decisions. If they're unable to, they need a healthcare proxy. A power of attorney can't make those decisions. A power of attorney can be used to secure medical documents if you need to pay medical bills, things of that nature, deal with insurance, but it's not for the purpose of making medical decisions on behalf of the principal. Agents only have the powers designated to them in the document. In the power of attorney form, there's a list of powers and transactions. The individual, the principal, can initial certain ones out of that or all of them. So it's important to know what that power of attorney has the power to do. A power of attorney terminates at the principal's death or when it's revoked. The agent has to be notified that the power of attorney was revoked, and so do third parties that were relying on the power of attorney, such as banks, health insurance. If somebody used the power of attorney to record a deed, the power of attorney revocation has to be on file with the county clerk's office. So it's important to note that, because if they're not put on notice, then it can lead to some problems down the line. So some of the scenarios in which we see power of attorney abuse, the first one is that the older adult usually paid their bills on time. They were pretty good. You know, they didn't have a lot of expensive purchases, and suddenly we see that the bills are falling behind. There's strange purchases or strange withdrawals. Habits are extremely telling. If you can go back in somebody's bank records and see, okay, this is how this person normally spent their money, and then when the power of attorney came into play, or this, you know, perpetrator came into play, suddenly we've got some abnormal purchases, the electric's not being paid, the care, maybe if this person's in a facility, that money is not going towards the facility. That is a huge red flag that can tell you what you need to know. So a big thing you want to note is, where is that money going? If there's a power of attorney in place, the only place the money should be going is where the principal explicitly directs, or in the principal's best interest. The next, and this goes hand in hand, the older adult cannot pay for essential needs or clothing or housing. Unfortunately, we see this a lot. We'll see essentials just not being paid, even though if you did a budget, the older adult should have enough money to cover those things. So why aren't these things being paid? We want to ask that. We want to know who's controlling the money. Does the older adult have control, or someone else? The next scenario is that the power of attorney agent is present in court. Did the agent abide by their fiduciary duty? Did they work at the best interest or direction of the principal? Can they account for the transactions that they did utilizing the POA? And then the last one, we always want to be able to speak to the older adult alone. If it seems like someone else is speaking on their behalf, we want to be able to get that opportunity to talk to that older adult by themselves, free of any perhaps undue influence or potential bad actors. And we want to talk to them. Who is this person to you? What is their relationship? Or do you have other family members or friends? And get their story without anyone around them to influence them. After power of attorney, we have guardianship. Guardianship is established through a court proceeding. It's important to note, because power of attorney, you do not need a court proceeding to have a power of attorney. If you would like a power of attorney, you can go hire an attorney to help you execute those documents. But guardianship is a court proceeding, Article 81 or 17A. It results in a court order designating someone as guardian of another individual's person or property. If someone claims to be another person's guardian, ask for the paperwork, because they should have that court order. Some of the risk factors for abuse. Elder abuse affects individuals of all genders, socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. There is no single profile for victims of elder abuse or their abusers. However, some of these risk factors up on the screen are some of the factors that predict an increased risk of elder abuse. This is a hot topic in the field of elder abuse. There are varying perspectives regarding the ability to accurately identify risk factors, but despite this, it is widely accepted that social isolation is the most prevalent and common factor in elder abuse cases. So, well, we can have things such as the victim being dependent on the abuser. They're socially isolated. There's a history of substance or mental health issues, which this shouldn't downplay abuse being present, but sometimes we can see a risk factor there for the abuse being present later on. They're hesitant to use social services systems. They want to be independent. They want to remain on their own. Because of that, maybe there's less eyes on them. For the abuser, they're dependent on the victim financially, maybe their housing, as I said before. They also have a history of substance abuse or mental health issues. or there's a previous history of elder abuse in a caregiving context. So perhaps this happened before with these two individuals and it was resolved, but it's happening again because of the caregiving context. Factors that may affect an older adult's ability to report abuse is older adults who have been abused may be reluctant to report maltreatment for a variety of reasons. This hesitation is often attributed to the abused not wanting to see themselves as a victim. Shame, embarrassment, belief that the abuse is their fault, or fear of getting the abuser in trouble, which is what Amanda said before. Sometimes that perpetrator, that abuser, is the only person standing in the way of, in that older adult's mind, going to a nursing home. Alternatively, the victim's reluctance to report could be because of manipulation or fear, threatening tactics. And these threats and manipulation play into the fears that the older adult is already holding.
Next, we're going to talk a little bit about ageism, the effects on an older adult's willingness to report. So ageism is the stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people on the basis of their age. Older people are sometimes overlooked for employment. They're restricted from social services and stereotyped in the media. Ageism marginalizes and excludes older adults in their communities and in our community. Ageism is an insidious practice that has harmful effects on the health and well-being of older adults. Unfortunately, it's one of the most socially normalized forms of prejudice. It's not widely fought against, like racism and sexism is. Systemic ageism leads to a marginalization of older adults in our communities, having a negative impact on their lives, their health, and their well-being. So the aging process and cognitive changes. The aging process, so psychosocial aging, approximately 92% of older Americans aged 65 and older have at least one chronic health condition, and close to 77% have two or more. Heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, all these things contribute to 2/3 of the deaths among older adults aged 65 and over. Common changes include hearing impairment, vision impairment, bone and joint deterioration, skin thinning, and skin dryness. From a developmental perspective, behaviors and traits often associated with older adults are merely the result of their current developmental stage. Repeated storytelling and forgetfulness and incessant worry, those things aren't necessarily a cognitive impairment. They're not necessarily a capacity issue. They very, very, very much could just be a normal part of the aging process for that person. In regard to mental health, as our population ages, the number of older adults with behavioral, mental health, or substance abuse issues is expected to increase. Conditions such as depression and anxiety adversely impact physical health. There's a negative impact from caregiver stress, the loss of social support networks, as well as declining health. All of those things can negatively impact a person's mental health. Cognitive changes. It's often assumed that cognitive capabilities decline with age, but that's not always necessarily the case. It is true that changes in thinking, slower reaction time, changes in short-term memory, reduced problem-solving abilities, those things do occur as people age. However, cognitive changes are mild in most older adults, and they don't generally affect their day-to-day functioning. So forgetting where you put the keys, or forgetting why you went into the kitchen, those can definitely be normal signs of aging. Short-term memory decline is normal, whereas changes in long-term memory are less expected as a person ages. And the ability to learn new skills as well as expressions of wisdom and creativity continue throughout life. The next slide. Cognitive impairments. So dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is a general term for loss of memory and the impairment of mental abilities. That includes communication and language, the ability to focus or pay attention, reasoning and judgment, and visual perception that's severe enough to interfere with daily life. So that's the key. It's severe enough to interfere with the person's daily living. It's important to keep in mind, however, that memory loss in and of itself is not necessarily an indicator of dementia. And there are numerous causes for memory issues, or memory problems, or just simple forgetfulness. Dementia is not a normal part of the aging process, nor is it a specific disorder. It's a broad term used to describe a cluster of symptoms. Generally, a progressive disorder, and it's caused by damaged brain cells. There are numerous types of dementia, various causes. The most common form that most people hear about and know about is Alzheimer's disease, which does account for 60 to 80% of the dementia cases. And it's just worth mentioning that Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and there is currently no treatment or cure for the disease. There has been just tons of growth into how to work on alleviating some of the symptoms or making the symptoms easier to live with, but as far as a cure or a treatment to get rid of it, it doesn't exist. The next thing we're going to talk about is capacity. So it's important to note that the spectrum of capacity ranges, and deficits in capacity are often not inclusive. An individual can be completely capable of making independent decisions in some areas, and then they require help in others. So there's a lack of decision-making capability altogether in other circumstances. It's just the way that capacity works. If, for an example, an older adult may be able to manage their decisions concerning day-to-day activities, such as their grooming or their cooking or their cleaning, but they may not be able to make meaningful decisions about their own medical treatment. Nevertheless, they may be capable of understanding what's involved in and therefore able to execute a healthcare proxy. So capacity is rarely lost completely, except in the most severe of cases. It varies by the complexity of the decision or the task at hand. It should always be evaluated in relation to whatever the particular act is or the issue is, a significant decision and the consequences. The higher level of capacity is required, the more evaluation that should be occurring. And it's not a question of is she competent or is he competent? Slide. Capacity can fluctuate in a person with cognitive impairment. They can experience good days and bad days, lucid intervals, and times where they're confused and disoriented. A couple of things that fit under the fluidness of capacity, sundowner syndrome, which we mentioned earlier on in our presentation. It's common with individuals where they think clearly and they're making sound decisions and they're having good conversation earlier on in the day. And then as the day starts to progress and nightfall starts to come, they're experiencing sadness, or they become agitated, or they seem delusional, or like they're hallucinating. Another thing that drastically impacts the perception of capacity is a person's medications. There are some medications that need to be taken at the same time every day, and if they aren't taken, then the person seems like they don't know what's going on. Again, something like a urinary tract infection can cause a person to be all out of sorts, and they seem like they're completely out of it, and then they get the proper medication and they get the infection taken care of, and they're back to being completely lucid. So those kinds of things need to be taken into consideration when we're looking at a person's capacity. So questions of capacity will almost always be present in cases of alleged elder abuse. Adult Protective Services petitioning for guardianship, family members petitioning the court or claiming that an older adult or a guardian is abusing or exploiting the older adult. A lawyer representing an older adult who's been exploited is arguing that the client lacked capacity to make a gift or execute a document like a healthcare proxy or power of attorney, and a party is seeking to overturn alleged or that someone was unduly influenced beneficiary who'd been exposing or exploiting.
So our next section in this presentation is elder abuse in the courts. What are some of the types of cases that elder abuse happens, you see in the court system? Criminal cases, assault, larceny, family law, orders of protection, civil actions and special proceedings, compelling a POA to account for their actions, or civil fraud, breach of contract, conversion. These are actions for recovery of money, oftentimes that the person has lost due to financial exploitation. Guardianship, domestic violence cases, evictions, where we will attempt to get the abuser or perpetrator out of the home of the older adult, and lawsuits against facilities, traffic, and consumer defense, which we see when someone's been scammed or financially exploited, and then they're left with some of the consumer ramifications, such as debt, and we need to defend them on those actions. Many statutes provide for the appointment of counsel for NAIP or allegedly incapacitated persons. Appointment of that counsel should be at the earliest possible point in a proceeding. Or if an appointment is not required, an early referral to free legal services providers, such as the Center for Elder Law and Justice, can really benefit both the individual and the court so that that person gets the legal counsel they so desperately need. Undue influence is defined as the misuse of one's role and power to exploit the trust, dependency, or fear of another to deceptively gain control over that person's decision making. Undue influence itself doesn't constitute elder abuse, but it is a means by which elder abuse is carried out through manipulation, coercive behaviors. And while undue influence does not require the older adult to suffer capacity issues, the presence of those capacity issues make it much easier for a perpetrator or abuser to exert undue influence. When undue influence is at play, the elder abuse victim seems to agree to acts or omissions that lead to their own loss of property or independence. So, but for that undue influence, maybe that older adult wouldn't have made that decision regarding their finances or property or where they live. So many different things can come into play with an abuser exerting undue influence. Some of the warning signs of undue influence: the abusers increasing the elder's dependence on him or her. So now that older adult can't function really without them present. Manipulation of the older adult's vulnerabilities, a victim being unable to explain the reasons for decision that clearly were against their best interest. And certainly, as we've talked about this whole time, isolation. That can definitely be a sign that undue influence is occurring. Court responses to elder abuse. Sorry, point. If you're on, can you please mute? Thanks all. So, sorry, the next section is court responses to elder abuse. We have a number of suggestions for case handling that help older adults while they have to go to court for some of these cases that I just mentioned. Lengthy court proceedings can be particularly difficult for individuals who have some capacity issues or their ability to testify is declining and they're nearing the end of their lives. Some of these suggestions are: provide priority case settling for elder abuse cases. A lot of times, the older adult doesn't want to go through a lengthy court process or court case in order to make themselves whole again or see the outcome. It might be advisable that they settle in some way while still getting what they need out of that case. As we mentioned earlier, being flexible and scheduling court appearances, keeping in mind that some folks have better capacity at various times of day. For example, some people, older adults, may be better in the morning than they are in the late afternoon. Be cognizant of the older adults' need for medication, breaks, rest. If this is a proceeding or appearance that's going to go for a longer amount of time, it might be advisable to take a break in order for that older adult to have their needs met. And as we mentioned earlier, accessibility in the courtrooms, devices that may help with hearing or reading or mobility. You can always contact our program if that's something that you need to arrange for an older adult. And utilize court advocates to assist older adults with the courthouse and the court process. Sometimes this is the first time an older adult has ever needed to go to court or had a legal issue, and it's quite nerve-wracking. So utilizing that court advocate, such as Amanda or someone from the Victim Assistance Program, to help navigate that older adult through the process can be really reassuring for them. And Amanda will talk about communicating with older adults.
When communicating with older adults, it's important to understand the aging process, which we talked about a little bit, as well as the developmental tasks typically associated with this demographic of people. Hearing and vision impairments are common in older adults, and some have even experienced a decline in cognitive ability. This can be challenging when attempting to communicate with an older adult, and some are typical communication traits associated with the elderly, like retelling of stories, forgetfulness. It can be frustrating to remember to be patient and be kind, and just rushing them or making gestures or movements, all that does is just cause further frustration and just makes it worse. It's essential that professionals are patient, take time when communicating with older adults. Hearing aids, reading glasses, document magnifiers, those are common. And so if you see, as the doctor said in the video, actually, if you know that someone has the need of a hearing aid, or if they have a better ear, that's the ear that you want to talk to. Sometimes it's a matter of just watching your lips move. It's things like that. Next slide. So being concerned when the older adult is being prevented from answering questions, you're asking questions directly to them and they're not allowed to speak for themselves, or the caregiver is trying to explain away injuries, or the caregiver is trying to explain away poor health. It's important to look for inconsistencies in the story in relationship to what's actually going on, what the injury actually is, what the circumstances actually are. When a caregiver is insistent that the older adult doesn't have capacity, they overdo telling you that they don't know what's going on, they're so confused, reiterating it over and over and over again. That's something to watch for, something to be concerned about. Next slide. So some of the common justifications that are made by the perpetrator: blaming the victim. Mom is always having accidents. She's so clumsy, or dad wasn't cooperating, or dad's so hard to take care for. You have no idea what I'm going through. Or mom's always falling and she bruises so easily. Next slide. Some of the common justifications that the offender, excuses that the offender could try to utilize. I have an anger problem, or I have a temper issue. I was drunk or high and I didn't know what I was doing. Or dad hit me when I was a kid. He was a terrible parent. And this is a sad set of circumstances. We have had clients who their older adult mother or father was a terrible parent, and they were extremely abusive. Some of them step up and still continue to take care of their parents in the best way that they possibly can. And others, it's a retaliation. It's almost like a retaliation where they have that parent in a position, consciously or subconsciously, where they're in control of the situation, in control of the parent, and now it's payback time. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about caregiver stress. So what do we know about caregiver stress? We know that it can be overwhelming and it can be stressful. And a lot of times it is overwhelming and stressful. Then those stresses lead to additional problems. Caregivers can react poorly because of the stress. They begin to overreact. They can become snappy. They begin to suffer themselves from issues of isolation and depression because they've taken on the caregiving role. However, we all experience stress. Most of us don't abuse, neglect, or exploit the people that we love. Abuse is a pattern. It's been established, sometimes lifelong pattern established, most times not an isolated incident. We would never tolerate, and I know I said this at the beginning of the slide, but I feel like it's the social worker in me, it's worth mentioning again. We would never ever tolerate abuse of children or abuse of pets. Why would we ever accept it for this vulnerable population? Caregiver stress is never ever an excuse to be an abuser. Next slide.
So it's important to assess the situation. Is someone speaking over or for the older adult? They won't let them get a word in edgewise. Is there a support person available to assist the older adult? Is that support person trustworthy? Like we spoke about earlier, is there any undue influence occurring that would create a situation, that would create a bad situation for the person, for the older adult? Is a criminal order of protection necessary? Is there criminal proceedings happening? And because of those criminal charges to the perpetrator, the older person is in need of an order of protection to keep them safe. Has the older adult been connected to other service providers in the community? Do they have a connection to OFA or APS like we spoke about earlier? So further considerations for the courts when you're handling elder abuse cases is, as I said previously, is there a court advocate or a support person that is made available throughout the whole court proceedings, multiple court proceedings if they're necessary, for that older adult? If the abused has to testify, should the judge provide instructions to the jury regarding the credibility of an older witness? It is appropriate to instruct the jury that an older adult is no more or less credible due to their cognitive, mental, or communication impairment. And as we spoke about earlier, what are some of the normal aging process? Courts can and should encourage victims to provide victim impact statements at their sentencing. And can you use alternative methods of obtaining and preserving testimony of the older victim? Those alternative methods include depositions, telephone hearings, substituting an older adult's court appearance with a conditional examination using a magistrate or court reporter, video conferencing, or using videotape testimony. A lot of times, these alternative methods can be a lot easier on the older adult than them coming to court. And if it's possible, they should be utilized. Crafting effective orders in cases involving elder abuse. Courts should assess the elder abuse survivors' needs globally. What is needed to make them safe and whole again? A holistic approach is encouraged to the case. Courts should consider the safety of the abused person Is there a safety plan? Does a restraining order need to be ordered or an order of protection granted? Should the court require the surrender of firearms of the abuser? Should the abuser or the older adult, the abused, be removed from the setting? And is a capacity assessment needed in this case? Here's something that comes into play in our practice quite a bit. Sorry. Because the person who is abusing the older adult is in a position of trust, the abused person may wish to maintain that relationship. It's their grandchild, it's their son, it's their daughter, it's somebody that they grew up with and or likely took care of, and they don't want to see that relationship just go away. It's important to assess, is that relationship possible without the victim sustaining further harm? Should counseling be ordered for either the abused party or the abuser, or both? What kind of counseling is appropriate? Is the older adult willing to participate in it? And has the abused person, so the older adult, been linked to appropriate services? Is APS involved at this point? Have they been involved earlier? Should they be involved now? Are some services that can be connected through Office of the Aging appropriate? Caregiver assistance, nurse consultation, in-home health care, meal programs, are those things that can help prevent this situation from happening again? And as I stated earlier, connecting that older adult with a victim assistance program in criminal cases or domestic violence cases is essential for them to have that support and be able to navigate the process. Another important note is protecting others from abuse by the abuser. Oftentimes we see in our office that if this abuser or perpetrator is doing it to one person, they're probably doing it to other people too. We've actually had cases where we find out that this isn't the first time this person's financially exploited someone. This is the first time that they've assaulted someone. And it's worth looking into those reports that are made. Something to consider is how to make the victim whole again. Is safety a priority? Is there a basis for the return of property or getting the abuser or perpetrator out of their home so that they can have, peace and quiet in their home again without this person there? Is it appropriate for a repayment schedule to be made if there's loss of funds, and so that person will get that restitution or money judgment back? And sometimes if it is appropriate to order a repayment schedule, that will avoid a long court process for not only the court system and the dockets, but that older adult as well. Additional considerations for civil courts are protecting the abused person's assets. A lot of times our office comes in and we want to stop the bleed. We see this person being exploited and taken advantage of, and we have to try to stop that as quickly as possible so no further damage is done. Can an injunction be issued or a power of attorney accounting be compelled? Is there a power of attorney or some other arrangement that needs to be terminated and then a new trustworthy person put in place? A big thing for our office, and that should be prioritized, is maintaining the independence of the abused person, respecting their decision making and their dignity. Do they have capacity? You want to be able to assess that. Is an assessment or health evaluation appropriate? And are there services that allow that person to stay in their home? This is something we see all the time. Older adults want to stay in their home. They don't want to be in an institutional setting. And what are ways we can help that person meet that goal? If a guardianship is necessary, would a limited guardianship be appropriate? So you want to look at the least restrictive means that have they all been considered. If placement in a care facility is necessary for that person's health and safety, have the least restrictive alternatives been considered? Conditions accompanying settlement negotiations in the courts. So if you do get to the point where there's a settlement negotiation for recovery of funds or property, these are some of the considerations you want to take into account. Is the abused person safe? Are they going to stay safe? Is, as I said before, repayment schedule appropriate? Are escalating sanctions appropriate if the person doesn't abide by the terms of the settlement? Additional considerations for criminal courts are, as we said previously, is an emergency order of protection necessary in order to keep this older adult safe? If the perpetrator is going to be released on bail or their own recognizance, is the victim at risk of further abuse? Is this perpetrator going to go right back to that older adult's home and continue the abuse? Something we consider in our office is, what are the older adults' wishes and goals for criminal cases or prosecution? What would they like to see happen? Is it more important for them to see this person face punishment, or is it more important for them to have some form of restitution? It's important to take those wishes into consideration in a criminal proceeding. This is a way to make the older adult feel whole and that someone's listening to them and that justice is being done for their case. Enforcing orders. In order to enforce orders the most effectively, I'm sorry guys, I don't know if you can see the slides, but I'm having a little bit of an issue with Microsoft Teams, so I hope that it's working out okay. We can always provide the slides after the training. So suggestions for ensuring compliance with court orders. Drafting orders with clarity and specificity so that the defendant and the older adult, the victim of abuse, can understand them and understand what is being ordered exactly. The same goes with drafting them with clarity so that law enforcement officers can understand how to enforce them. Judges can explain to abusers that only the court can change the order. The actions or the statement of the victim don't mean that order go away. We see this a lot. So after an order may be in place or put in place, the older adult, because they wish to remain in that relationship or retain some semblance of that relationship, or because they're being manipulated by that perpetrator, they will minimize the order or say, it's okay, you don't have to pay me this month or next month or for the next year, or you can come back in the house, but just stay for a little bit. It's important to let the abuser know that that order can still be violated. It's not the actions or statements of the victim that, make the order disappear. It's still enforceable. Orders should specify in detail the consequences and penalties that defendants will face for violating them, so that they're on notice that this is what will happen to them if they violate this order. Suggestions for ensuring compliance with the court. Consider automatically giving a copy of the order to the correct law enforcement, sheriff, chief of police. That way officers should be able to confirm the existence and contents of orders at any time. Keep jurisdiction over elder abuse cases so that the enforcement will be more effective. We've seen this where family court will keep jurisdiction over a case that has concurrent criminal case ongoing, and the family court judge would want to keep jurisdiction so that they can make sure that temporary order or permanent order is still being abided by the perpetrator. And this is really helpful because it keeps eyes on the perpetrator and the older adult from multiple places.
So where?
Oh, go ahead, Mass.
All right. So where can you make referrals? How can you make referrals to the Elder Advocacy Program, or in the different services that we have available in our community? So it's worth mentioning, first of all, that if it's an emergency situation, the referral should go directly to law enforcement. Our program, the Program in Adult Protective Services, they can, those can be followed up with after, but if it's an emergency in the moment, law enforcement should be the first place that you report. Go ahead. So Center for Elder Law and Justice in our Elder Advocacy Program, we've gone over the criteria for that. If there's an abusive situation, there's the client wants assistance. They've told you that they want assistance. We would appreciate the referral to the program. Adult Protective Services. So their client characteristics, the individual being referred has to meet 3 criteria to be referred to them. They have to have a reduced capacity for self-care, so neglect or mental or physical impairment. Because of that, the person that's being referred is unable to meet their essential needs for any number of things: food, clothing, shelter, medication. Maybe their utilities are off. They've got themselves in a situation where they need to be protected from physical or mental injury, maltreatment, or financial exploitation, and they have no one else who's available or willing to provide responsible assistance. Next slide. So for services like Meals on Wheels, or if a person has food insecurities, if they need some safety planning, like a life alert, or transportation to medical appointments, or high cap insurance counseling services, those referrals go to the New York Connects program through Office of the Aging. The numbers for that are listed here on this slide. And then our Chautauqua County Enhanced Multidisciplinaries team. So if there's a complex case where a client does not have capacity, or they just seem rather convoluted, these complex elder abuse and financial exploitation cases for individuals in our county aged 55 and over, and again, the victim does not have to have capacity to be referred to this team. Those referrals come directly to me. My email address is listed there. Our main office line is listed on the slide, as well as my extension 261.
So now we'll cover very briefly some of the New York State laws that concern elder abuse. So in the New York State penal law does not define elder abuse in any way, but there are provisions that are relevant to cases involving elder abuse, such as those up on the screen. This is a reference, it's not exhaustive, but you do have, assault, intent to cause physical injury to a person who is 65 years of age or older, and the actor is more than 10 years younger than the person. This provision can come in handy. You have identity theft, scheme to defraud, aggravated family offense. So these are some of the penal law statutes that can come into play with elder abuse cases. For adult protective services, this is covered under the social services law. Services include receiving and investigating reports, arranging for medical and psychiatric services, arranging for guardianship if it's necessary, protective placement, providing services to assist impaired individuals to move if they need to from hazardous situations, and cooperating and planning with the courts as needed on behalf of individuals with serious mental impairments. APS is also required or authorized by statute to report to law enforcement when there's any reason to believe that a criminal offense has been committed. They do have immunity from civil liability for those who report that an individual may be an endangered adult. And there's petitions to Supreme or County Court to become guardian, or if somebody's is in need of protective services and they don't believe they do need it. There is no mandatory reporting of suspected elder abuse in New York State, and this is often unbelieved because we think, oh, New York State, we're on top of it, right? Well, unfortunately, we're the only state in the nation without such a mandate. APS is required to make a report, as I said earlier, to law enforcement where such suspicion of criminal offense against an endangered adult occurs, and Office of the Aging is a mandated reporter. Very briefly, touching on the guardianship law, this is located in the mental hygiene law, 8105, 8106. This is petitions for guardianship. Again, this is a court proceeding to Supreme or County Court if somebody is in need of a court appointment of a guardian of person and or property. It's necessary to provide personal needs of the person, food, clothing, shelter, safety, manage the property and financial affairs of that person. The person has to agree to the appointment or they're incapacitated as defined by the mental hygiene law. Sometimes, as I said earlier, a temporary guardian can be put in place while the other means are being explored. So in order to perhaps stop a potential financial exploitation or ongoing financial exploitation or abuse, a temporary guardian can be issued, or an injunction or temporary restraining order, until further options for this older adult are explored. (8143) proceedings under mental hygiene law are proceedings to discover property withheld. This is commenced by a guardian, or it may be commenced in the court if that guardian believes that the alleged incapacitated person's real or personal property was withheld or used inappropriately. We've seen this in cases where a family member was a guardian or was a POA at some point. A new guardian was established over the older adult or alleged incapacitated person, and we need to go back and discover what was happening with this person's finances before someone became guardian. And a lot of times this comes into play because the older adult should have perhaps funds to be able to care for their pay for their long-term care, and those funds are gone. So we want to use an 8143 to discover what happened along the way with those funds, and in order for perhaps this person to qualify for Medicaid or pay for their long-term care or pay for their needs on a daily basis. That's what this portion of the mental hygiene law would, where it would come into play. In the family court, you have the Family Court Act, Article 8, Family Court Orders of Protection. This can happen, anyone who is in relation to the older adult or is married or a member of the same household or has an intimate relationship, or the older adult can bring an action for an order of protection. Upon the first filing, you'll see the court may find for good cause that a temporary order is necessary. And then if the temporary order is issued, you'll go forward in court proceedings to get a permanent order. Usually they are no longer than 2 years. Or sometimes the temporary order isn't issued, but then as the court proceedings go on, you can see an order issued down the line. And this is protect the older adult from some of those offenses such as assault, disorderly conduct, larceny, those types of things that this perpetrator has committed. The durable power of attorney statute is located in the general obligations law, Section 5, 1501, all the way through 1511. You have the law stating how a valid power of attorney is created, the types of powers that can be granted, the standard of care, like I went over earlier, fiduciary duties of the agent, that the agent has to show records or transactions that they've done. They have to keep the property separate. And that agent may be subject to liability for conduct or omissions which violate that fiduciary duty. The special proceeding, which is in Section 5, 1510, is used to compel accountings of power of attorneys so that we can see what they've been doing with the principal's funds. A power of attorney can be revoked. The notice does have to be given to that agent. It has to be delivered either in person or via mail, and then also to any third parties. We also have the statutory gifts rider, which currently is in effect. It's an additional document that, if executed, gives the agent additional gifting powers. If it's not executed, in the current statutory power of attorney form, it only allows for gifts to be made up to $500 in 1 calendar year. But if the person executes a standard statutory gifts rider, it can be over 500. And gifting is not just gifting birthday gifts or Christmas gifts. Although that's what it sounds like, it can also mean things such as changing beneficiaries on insurance policies, transferring property for less than fair market value. And some of these powers can be really important in long-term care planning. Next, we have the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. The Ombudsman Program is a federal advocacy program dedicated to protecting people living in long-term care facilities. This helps mediate or be a liaison between the family, the resident, and the facility, and resolve disputes or complaints that may be happening. If you need to contact the Ombudsman Program, you can call 1-855-582-6769. And we can always put that into the materials when you get an email after the fact.
So now what? With any case involving suspected elder abuse or neglect. I can do the next slide. So we understand that in some circumstances, possibly most circumstances, that judges, the court system, that you may not be comfortable sharing information. And we're not asking for that. If you feel comfortable and you feel it's appropriate to notify, to speak with that older adult about making a referral to the Elder Advocacy Program, we're okay with you handling it that way. If you aren't comfortable sharing information, we're not asking for you to share any information with us other than just reaching out to us and letting us know that you've shared our information with someone else, just so that if a follow-up needs to be done or someone does contact us, that we're able to report where these referrals are coming from. The process of making a referral to the Elder Advocacy Program is notifying the older adult that you're going to be making a referral, or giving them the information if you're not comfortable making a warm referral. The referrals go to our paralegal in our office, Francine Rondinell. The older adult's name, phone number, and the summary of the situation that they're in, her name, number, extension, it's all on the slide. We'll make sure that you get that information after. If you do want to do a warm referral, we're okay with that as well, but we don't ever want to be putting anyone in a situation where they feel uncomfortable. Go ahead, next. And that's it. We appreciate you guys taking the time to be on this training today. It means a lot to us to get the information out there and share with all of you. What you do is super important to our process and to this community. Does anybody have any questions, comments, anything that
I don't see anything in the chat,
I
Amanda.
didn't see anything in the chat either. So.
Yeah. So if no one has any questions, this is our contact information. Our program director is Nicole Partial. Her information's up on the screen. My name is Gabrielle Markle. I'm a staff attorney. And then Amanda, our social worker. So if you need that contact information, we'll be able to make that available for you after the presentation. Otherwise, that's it for us. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We can stick around for maybe a few more minutes for anyone who has questions. We'll be here to answer them. If not, we really appreciate you guys listening today, participating in this training, and learning about elder abuse and what can be done to stop it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, there everybody goes.